Welcome to the Agronomy and Farm Management Podcast. I'm Bruce.
And I'm Josh, and we're your farm management hosts. Let's get started.
Josh, we're going to be talking about college today, a type of college, but let's think back to maybe our own college experience. What was a memorable college time or an event or an experience that you had in your college days?
Bruce, I gotta think back all the way to 8 years ago, my freshman year on campus there at Ohio State. Actually, I'd say my main memory comes from my sophomore year. They do a lottery system to find out where you're living, and we got a lottery number of 241 out of 7,000, which is a really good lottery number. So we got to basically pick wherever we wanted to live on campus. So we chose the dorm Scott's on North Campus, and it's a brand new building, 7 floors. We chose the top floor of Scott, where we could look right down Woodruff Avenue, see Ohio Stadium, see Ag Campus in the distance. Oh, it was the best place to live. What about you, Bruce? What was your favorite memory?
So 100 years ago when I went to college, not quite, but longer than you, but I went to OSU Lima my freshman year, and it's kind of a general memory of really living with family. I got to live with my grandparents for 1 year and go to the OSU Lima branch. And while I was there at OSU Lima, I met another gentleman. He was a year ahead of me, but we ended up becoming friends. And then we moved to Columbus for the next 3 years. And that was really a good experience to meet somebody new and really build a lifelong friendship that we still have today. Our kids are adults now, and we don't have any of us have grandkids, but by golly, we've had a lifelong friendship, and that meant a lot to me. But I do remember that year living with my grandparents. That was a lot of stories. I learned a lot about my grandparents and their times and their experience in farming during that year. So that was great, great memory for me.
College really teaches you to get close with people because you're in a small room with them. So, Bruce, today we've got a guest named Trevor Corboy. Trevor is the current agriculture and natural resources educator for OSU Extension in Brown County. He's been with OSU Extension since November of 2012, and he's an alumni of the College of Food, Agricultural, and Environmental Sciences and holds his Bachelor's of Science in Agriculture, focusing on animal science and agribusiness. He went to obtain a degree from the University of Florida with a Master of Science in Education focused in extension education. Trevor resides in Brown County with his wife Rachel on his family-owned farm, which has been established since the 1850s. Here he is active in Angus cattle, Boer and Nubian goats, hay, and grain products. Trevor currently provides leadership as one of the 4 co-leaders with the small farms team for OSU Extension. Trevor, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me on.
Trevor, I appreciate your leadership and what you do for OSU Extension in small farm, college, and education. So, why are small farms important for you and to the state of Ohio? And how would you define a small farm for us?
Sure. So, small farm, those can be anything from someone that has just purchased some land to anyone that has maybe held that land. It could be a couple hundred acres. It could be as small as 3 to 5 acres or even smaller. And so, really looking to grow some type of product, raise livestock, do something with that land. Very important in the state of Ohio because we have several small farms and family farms across the state, obviously. Very passionate about it personally as the 6th generation there on my family farm, but really helping those folks to be able to explore what they're interested in on their land. Those small farms, very important to our landscape in the state.
So, Trevor, for me, the hardest thing is always getting started. You have this idea and you always want to try the idea, but getting started is the hard part. How does the small farm college prepare you for the tools that a producer needs to get started?
Sure. So, great question. So, the Small Farm College is a series of at least 4 classroom type setting. We do some hands-on follow-up activities after that, but really that getting started piece is very important. So, thinking about things like your goals. What kind of goals do you have personally that you would like to get out of your small farm or your enterprise? What are the business goals? Do you have other folks involved with you in this? You have to answer a lot of questions personally, but then also for the business. Do I want to raise a couple of goats and just have those kind of as pets, or do I want this to be a business? If we want it to be a business, we can start to talk about things like business plans, mission statements, and other things that come into that. And so, really, through this small farm college, start to build out that mission, vision, goals, values. We'll do some other business planning type pieces that will really get you set up for success for that long-term aspect of that business.
Trevor, I have a follow-up question. Can you elaborate a little bit more about a farm business plan? What is that?
Sure, Josh. So that's a really scary word for a lot of folks, but really that farm business plan is really just putting all these pieces together that we talk about in the small farm college. And so through this tool, we'll help you gather those goals, those mission, vision, values. But really that farm business plan is a document that you could take to a lender, get some capital resources, some money potentially for that business. Maybe you're looking to expand or maybe even just starting. And so you can use that farm business plan not only as a guidance tool for you and maybe your family members or partners in that business, but then also as a resource in gaining financial capital long term with that business. That farm business plan can definitely change as the business evolves. You may start with a farm business plan that has a goal to raise 20 goats. We'll kind of stick with that example. And with those meat goats, you may say that we want to expand, and that number may go from 20 to 100 or more. And so with that, the business plan might change. And so definitely a living document, but getting that boundary set for that business and then expanding on it as the business grows.
So, Trevor, it's often said there's two things you can't avoid in life, and one of those is death, and the other one is taxes. How does the Small Farms College prepare a person for the tax discussion as a small business owner and operator?
Taxes are definitely one of those things that we don't always like to talk about. And whether it's thinking about our personal taxes, let's just say, for example, this small farm business is sole proprietorship or something that doesn't have its own legal entity, which we'll get into here later potentially. Those pieces, something with this farm enterprise, could affect our personal taxes. So we might use something called a Schedule F in our taxes. But first, we need to figure out what's farm and what's maybe farm income. How do we handle those books? And so we start to get into the accounting pieces, thinking about, are we keeping our money separate? And all these pieces come together depending on that structure, that farm business plan. And so having those budgets in place, knowing what we're raising, are we being profitable on what we're raising? And then how are we accounting for that in tax? So if we have that income, we need to show that income on our taxes. If we're having that loss, why are we having a loss from a financial perspective of the business, and then showing that loss or finding ways to maybe be more profitable? Again, going back to that business plan for the business, is our goal to make money, to cover some other expense in life or pay for part of a farm or some other investment, keeping those records to know how we're doing not only financially, but then also from the farm business. Are my 20 goats making money or are they losing money? All kinds of different records we can keep and a lot of different pieces to this. But again, with our taxes, thinking about how does this business flow to our taxes, taking care of those, taking care of our financial records, thinking about our enterprises as a whole. Are we making money? And then also keeping those records.
So, Trevor, whenever we're looking at the numbers of a small business, I'm kind of a nerd about this. I love looking at numbers. I love trying to understand what numbers mean. Can you tell the podcast listeners a little bit about what the Small Farms team looks at whenever we're looking at those financial sheets? What sheets are we looking at? What do they mean, and how they tell if a business is healthy or not?
So the numbers are definitely important. And so I alluded to this some thinking about our records and our budgets, because all these pieces, the financial tracking is very important. Again, whether we're making money or not, we need to know these things. And so we need to know that financial health of the business to be able to figure out, are we where we want to be in this process? And so thinking about cash flow statements, balance sheets, and income statements. Well, what do all those mean? And so cash flow, think about it just that. How is the money flowing through the business? Do we have certain periods of time that we have more cash that we need to manage throughout the year for another part of the year? So think about, from that goat example that we talked about, am I going to have goats constantly for sale? Or am I maybe selling those at specific points in the year that I then need to manage those other things like feed bills, forage expenses, maintenance on that farm? Again, with our balance sheet, thinking about all the things on the farm, income and expense. Maybe we still have a feed bill that's due at the end of the year. So looking at that maybe from an annual cycle from January 1 to December 31, thinking about our health of our business from a financial standpoint. What do we have on hand? What expenses do we have out there? And really another way to look at, to some extent, profit and loss year over year, potentially, depending on how we keep those books. Income statements, again, what money is coming in, going out, thinking about all these different financial health aspects of the business. Again, with that small farm, hopefully we're making money and being able to do something productive, not only for the land, but then also for ourselves. But in some situations, that's maybe not the case. Maybe one business, maybe we've got goats and cattle. And so maybe our goats cost us a little bit more money, but our cattle offset that in some way. But we really enjoy those goats. Kind of picking on goats there for a minute, but occasionally they do that to us. Our cattle can do that to us too. So again, all in what we want out of that business, going back to our mission, vision, and goals. All these pieces intertwine together. And so thinking about the financial health through some of these aspects and really just keeping track of putting in those numbers, keeping our records. There are tools out there that will help us keep track of these money pieces. So that Small Farm College, we talk about those tools. And so really a good resource to start to think through these pieces on that farm business.
So we're able to see the health of our business, but what else can we use these statements for? Is there any way that we can benefit by doing this, or is it just to see how healthy we are?
Great question. And so that balance sheet in particular, so any of us that have went to a lender and asked for some resources there from them, maybe we're looking to expand or needing a little bit more capital on the farm, they're going to ask for a balance sheet, whether that's a personal balance sheet, but then also our business balance sheet. And so basically that lender is going to want to know, how is the financial status of the business? Are we making money? Are we losing money? And so they want to see, what do we have on hand? What are those other assets we have? And so all these documents are definitely important in keeping, especially that balance sheet, knowing that status based on a given day of that farm business. And then also, again, tying back to our personal, what's going on with this.
So, Trevor, it would seem like legal issues come up probably when a small farm is first beginning to be established. Risk issues, risk management, but legal issues as well. How does a small farm college prepare these farms to address those areas of management?
Sure. So legal issues definitely happen. And so maybe we have just purchased 5 acres that has been part of a larger farm, and we have some new development around us. And so our neighbors maybe aren't used to that farm that has been there in existence. Maybe it's a smaller scale now. And so thinking about, how do our neighbors relate to the things that we're trying to do? Maybe we have some hogs, and so occasionally hogs have a little bit of smell. So do some of our other animals. And so are our neighbors okay with that smell? Working through those neighborly relations, maybe we have some fence that needs fixed. How do I manage that? And so on the farm office website, farmoffice.osu.edu, there's all kinds of resources there from those legal sides of things, of neighbor relations, as we like to talk about them in the Small Farm College, that come up. All kinds of legal things come up. Food law, maybe I'm looking to take my beef and start to sell that off farm as a freezer beef type product. And so what do I need to do legally to be able to raise that beef, take it to a processor? Is that USDA processed, ODA? Is that custom exempt? All these things, working through, what does all this mean? And working through those food laws. Maybe it's a cottage food product. A lot of legal resources. And so one night's probably not enough to talk about that law and order and legal resources, but we try to pack a lot of things in there. Also under this comes that risk piece. And so with all farm businesses, there is some risk. With any business, there's risk. And so we need to talk about, how do we manage that risk, whether it's financial or something else legally. Am I having visitors to the farm? And so what risk comes into it there? Again, all these legal things also tie back to loan options, which ties back to our financial pieces and our business plan. Tying all these pieces together really starts to come out in that legal night. We start to get into that third or fourth week of the college. And so all these pieces start to come together. Another thing to consider with our small farm businesses is sometimes we don't always have crop insurance. And so sometimes with some of our other crops, whether it be forages or some of our livestock or grain crops, we can look at crop insurance, but not necessarily on some of those specialty crops. And so that comes back to that risk assessment. what are we willing to take on for risk, because we are truly financially responsible for some of these things that we might try to grow. And so can I afford to have a crop failure, or how does that work? Making sure that I'm avoiding crop failures or things that might come up, and being sure that my farm business is healthy financially, but then also successful for what I want it to be.
Well, Trevor, you mentioned that this might be a multi-night type of event. If someone was interested in attending a small farms college, what can they expect? What's the logistics look like of the program?
Great question. So the small farm college has traditionally been a multi-night program, and so we try to host these regionally throughout the state. Usually they're in the winter or in the fall and spring months. That way we're not affecting too many folks that are trying to be outside and doing stuff on their property. So this is traditionally in recent years been a 4-night program. And so we'll talk about kind of getting started that first night. Second night, start to talk about some of the legal issues, the financial pieces might be another night, and then really starting to work through that business plan and pull those pieces together there. And so with that, as we start to think about all those pieces over those 4 nights, looking to add potentially a 5th night that would be actually a kind of on-farm simulation piece that you could practice with that knowledge you've just learned, not necessarily on your farm. And so give you a little bit of hands-on experience. And so over those 4 or 5 nights, really helping folks think about what are your goals for your farm, your family, or that business partner in this, and really help clear up what could I do with that small farm acreage. Again, maybe it's a couple acres all the way up to a couple hundred acres. And so all those can be small farms. And so just figuring out and helping folks to manage those properties and be successful in what they're looking for.
Trevor, it seems like there's going to be a lot of questions and answers that happen during those sessions where the attendees are going to say, hey, I have a specific question. And it sounds like you've really developed that type of a relationship. You're building a relationship with those that attend with some content experts. And so any final thoughts as you kind of wrap up how you would describe that experience with leading and providing these small farms colleges?
Yes. So as some of my colleagues would say, the small farm college is really just the beginning for some folks. Maybe you've not been a part of another OSU extension program. And so starting to get those resources, we're not going to cover everything that you need in those 4 or 5 nights, but we're going to get you started on thinking about the basics of that farm business or your small farm adventure. And so from that, leading you to maybe other programs, educational resources that might be out there. I mentioned some of our resources online. If you look up Small Farm Team OSU or farmoffice.osu.edu, there's several resources there. And so all these resources can be used to get you started on that small farm journey.
Thanks for listening today.
For more information about farm management tips, be sure to check out the Farm Office at farmoffice.osu.edu.